What a short amount of time this all happened. And actually, our top story this morning really crystallizes the challenge for the new chief of staff. We're going to begin with that new report that says President Trump overruled his closest advisors, including family members, when it came to the initial response to the New York Times story about that meeting between Donald Trump Jr. and a Russian attorney in 2016. Now, those advisors reportedly pushed for full transparency, but were overruled at the president's personal direction. I just want to put that in quotes because it's really important for everyone to really keep in mind here. The biggest issue may be the president himself. That may be the biggest challenge. The Washington Post, citing multiple sources with direct knowledge, reports that the misleading four-sentence statement was personally dictated by the president flying home from the G20 summit on July 8th. So think about it. He gets away from everybody. There's attorneys, everybody wants to talk to him, gets on a plane and overrules his inner circle, his kids. According to the Post, presidential advisor and son-in-law Jared Kushner's lawyers knew how damaging the emails could be explicitly about Hillary Clinton and the campaign. The report says that Hope Hicks, the White House director of strategic communications, huddled with Kushner's lawyers and advocated for a more transparent approach. In one scenario, these people said Kushner's team talked about sharing everything, including the contents of the emails with the mainstream news organization. Hicks reportedly also spoke by phone with Trump Jr. about the strategy of transparency, believing the complete story would eventually emerge. But as they boarded Air Force One, President Trump apparently intervened, the president directing that Trump Jr.'s statement described the meeting as unimportant. He wanted it to say that the meeting had been initiated by the Russian lawyer and primarily was about her pet issue, the adoption of Russian children. In a forward cabin, Trump was busy working on his son's statement. The president dictated the statement to Hope Hicks, who served as a go-between with Trump Jr., who was not on the plane, according to people with knowledge of the discussions. Attorney for President Trump, John Dowd, called the story fake news, incorrect, and misinformed, of no consequence. Another one of his attorneys, Jay Sekulow, used similar language. Donald Trump Jr.'s lawyer told the Post, "I have no evidence to support that theory of the president intervening." So, Willie, take it to the table. It seems to me that if this is true, and this is double and triple sourced at this point, there's real conflict in terms of what really happened, and also potentially some legal trouble for the president.
Well, it's so blatant and so unwise by the president of the United States, knowing what the truth of the meeting was, that they'd been approached, Don Jr. had been approached with information about Hillary Clinton that potentially would have been damaging. For the president to go out and say, let's just tell them it was about an adoption and this thing will go away, it's not smart strategically. It's obviously dishonest, but it's also not smart strategically, Rick Tyler. And it also raises the question, as you read in great detail the story on the front page of the Washington Post, about the leaks, again, coming out of the West Wing, somebody getting their side out of the story out in the public on the front page of the paper because they know what's coming down the pike.
Well, look, what raised suspicion when I first heard about it is a campaign generally doesn't take meetings about policy issues because you're trying to win a campaign. And he had secured the nomination at that point, but he was still running against Hillary Clinton. So there's no chance that he was going to take an issue. But think about this. This is a 5-hour plane ride coming back from the G20, and the entire staff is consumed in this inconsequential, meaningless meeting. And then you have the president's lawyer, who apparently went out and lied for the president, or the president is lying to his lawyer about the nature of the meeting.
Well, on top of it, Steve Kornacki, there are serious questions that Bob Mueller might have about the president drafting this, if indeed he did.
Right. I guess, and look, not being a legal expert, I can say, though, if you lie to the press, you can certainly pay a deep political price, but generally it's not a crime to lie to the press. You think back to Bill Clinton's impeachment, when he said, "I did not have sexual relations with that woman," he was lying, but that wasn't the part he was impeached for. It was when he said it under oath. It was when he said it when he was actually being deposed in that case. So the question here, I think, is more indirect when it comes to Mueller. Mueller? Does a story like this, does a revelation like this perk up his interest and get him to look this way? But I think in terms of what's on the record right now, there's probably not any legal jeopardy.
So, Elise, though, what would you be interested in if you were looking at the president for a lot of different questions, including potentially his team with collusion with Russia, and you see perhaps inconsistencies, at least in the description about what this meeting was about, starting from the president drafting a statement?
I think it just goes back to the question, why is President Trump himself so involved in how the response is moving forward? Why is he so consumed with what the response is going to be when it comes to this Russia investigation? And what is it that is out there that he is so worried about surfacing that he has a one-on-one with Putin's translator at the G20? Just at the end of the day, there's that big cloud of why does President Trump address Putin and Russia in such different terms than any other slight he ever encounters, such as the other day, Putin says he's going to ban over 700 employees at the U.S. Embassy in Moscow, not a peep from Donald Trump. When does he not respond to a slight?
And this is what we talked about yesterday, but now, given this new story, it's even more important as we deal with potentially an incoming chief of staff that, for many, might provide some hope. Like, oh my gosh, perhaps we're going to have some order here. Perhaps they, maybe actually everybody will report to somebody before they go straight to the president. Maybe there'll be some sort of organization within the White House. And yet then you see what happens when this president gets off on his own with his phone or with his family. Things happen, Sam Stein.
Well, yeah, I mean, keep in mind this happened before General Kelly,
way before
John Kelly was chief of staff. I do think you're pointing out something interesting, though, which is when you unceremoniously fire or get rid of your chief of staff, in this case Reince Priebus, and your press secretary, there is the possibility that they might come around and bite you. And I'm not saying that they're responsible with this Washington Post story, but you have to wonder if people are disaffected with your administration, who worked in your administration, what kind of stuff they can tell the press. I'm sure that's going on in the minds of Trump people today. I'm also struck by what Willie said, which is there's sort of like this ham-fistedness to all of this, this utter lack of discretion from the Trump team about how they're handling all this that is just puzzling to me. The cover-up is just so poorly executed that it's just raising all these suspicions. Why is he in there crafting that statement? Why is he talking to Putin so much? Why is he firing Comey? I mean, everything he's doing leads someone, a casual observer, to say, what's going on here? Something must be happening. And I'm just wondering why they're so bad at being discreet.
And it raises the question again and again, to Elise's point, of whenever it comes to Russia, there's always some cloud of smoke around. There's never a clear-cut answer. And if this was a nothing meeting, as Don Jr. insisted again and again and again before all these revelations about what it really was about, why do you have this meeting? Why do you have this meeting with the President of the United States and the Cabinet of Air Force One where he says, just say it's about adoption? If it's a nothing meeting, just say what it was about. And as Hope Hicks and others are portrayed in this Washington Post story, just put it out there. Say what it was about. If nothing happened in the meeting, just say what happened.
Exactly. And the other thing is their current line is that this is something that is so rudimentary and benign that every campaign is interested in opposition research. That's their current talking point. If that's the case, why even go through the first step of attaching it to adoption policy, of having the president waste his time trying to concoct some sort of excuse for this? I mean, if it's so benign, stick with the benign explanation. But clearly it's not benign.
But this is what the president would have done when he was in charge of Trump Tower, right? He's got the family business, and the family's deciding, and they're advising, and they're saying, hey, we got a plan, Dad, here it is. And he's like, no, we're going to do this. And then he just went off and did it. Remember, this meeting would have never come about because Jared Kushner and his lawyers and Ivanka apparently wanted to be transparent. And they were getting ready to, and then it looked like Don Jr. was on board with that plan, and the president just blew it up and overruled it. And their story just changed. The adoption story wasn't working. And so, it's an opposition meeting. Who cares? Everybody does opposition. It was with the Russians. Oh, well, never mind. But I also think it's very interesting about the Russian angle to all this, because remember, President Trump had a off-the-record meeting with Vladimir Putin. That went on for a long time. Vladimir Putin has now taken action against the United States for what Obama did as he was leaving the administration and throwing out their diplomats. Now he has finally responded because there was a promise made somewhere to Putin that we will lift these sanctions, we'll get it on track. Now that the Congress has embarrassingly to the president taken that away, but could Putin actually say was said in that meeting? Because we don't have our side of that transcript.
Yeah.
There was no American interpreter in that meeting. So Putin could essentially come out and say, here's all the things we talked about, whether they're true or not. I think that's dangerous.
I think essentially this is the big story of the day, and this could unfold into more questions and more answers.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.